Alright, this is a big one, how to construct the 7 folds. I'll teach you guys how each one is formed, the properties to expect from the folds, and also some quick tips and tricks to easily create them via sculpting and drawing. And also, if you prefer a reading format, I already have this information on my blog, so links below. Anyway, on to the folds. Actually, before we get onto the folds, here are some quick things you need to pay attention to when dealing with cloths or fabrics in general. Now this is important, the foundation on which all your folds are built, so don't skip ahead. Alright, so number one are resting areas. These are the areas on which the fabric rests on. Now these areas, like most areas under the fabric, will influence what the fabric does or looks like. Is it round, square, a person, furniture, etc.? This is the big picture on which your folds rest. Number two, we have tension points, and these are the points of tension. Yeah, these are so obvious. Points of tension from which the folds actually stem from. These can range from 1 to countless, and they will dictate a good deal of where your folds are going, aka the direction. We'll get more into this later on. Number three, we have gathering areas. These are the areas at which the fabric gathers, usually but not always at the opposite end of the tension point or points. These areas will give extra life to the folds that you are trying to create, and this is usually the area you will exaggerate or simplify if that's what you are going for, so definitely pay attention to these as well. Up next we have number four, not as important, but the material itself usually won't dictate the type of fold, but will often soften or add more folds depending on the type of material. So leather acts very differently from silk and cotton, for example. And last but not least, we have gravity and action or movement. So luckily for us, Earth doesn't vary wildly with its gravity from hour to hour, but if your character is flying through space or falling from a 10-story building or just walking, the drapery needs to reflect this action. It might seem obvious when you're drawing from reference, but people often forget this when drawing from imagination, so be sure to represent it in your drawings. Okay, now that we've got the foundation out of the way, let's actually move on to the folds, and first up we have the foundational pipe fold. Now definitely the easiest fold to remember and draw or sculpt, the pipe fold is characterized by the obvious pipe-like shape and simple to understand tension points or point. The tension points are either a simple single point like a hanging piece of material from a hook, or a simple set of repeating points like curtains, or a mix of multiple points from one end to the next, like the pipe folds you see on shirts or cloth when pulled taut. The folds can flow over the resting areas, and if they gather will form a collection of pipes hanging down when still or pushed away during movement or a breeze. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the explanation. Given that this fold is so simple, let's just move on to the drawing and sculpting of the fold so you have a better understanding of it and what it does. Alright, so first up we have drawing the pipe folds, and these are drawn either using alternating concave and convex pipe shapes as a base, and then connecting them to form a continuous string of folds, or starting off with simple ellipses and then constructing pipes from that. You could also draw them radiating out from a single point as seen over here, or as a series of mixed pipes moving from a single point to many. Make sure to vary these shapes, by the way, as sometimes pipes will taper out as they move away from the tension points, so it is kind of dynamic. Whatever the scenario is though, pipes really help to show direction and simplicity of a fold. They can also be used to represent something elegant, so depending on the scenario it can be used differently. And yes, before you say that this is a 3D channel and I don't need to include 2D information, I'm going to have to stop you because explaining the 2D theory is basically used as a foundation for the 3D parts. So yeah, it is necessary to go through the drawing part first and then move on to 3D. Okay, but with that out of the way, first up we have the area that pushes out or convex and two adjacent areas that push in or concave. This is really the mentality I'm using with all folds, not just pipe folds. One area is displaced, so the adjacent areas need to compensate for this. And you can see the results over here. There are a few things I'll keep in mind when sculpting, and that is how big, how much convexity, the direction, and how long the pipe fold will be in this context. Now given that information, I'll start off with a relatively low mesh and work my way up in density as I progress. And really, this is it, the type of mentality. As long as you keep to the rules I laid out with the 2D pipe folds, and given that you actually know how to sculpt, the rest is quite easy. Just keep in mind that the folds are formed on one fabric, so if the area pushes out on one side, other areas will need to give in order to compensate for that movement. As long as this rule is used, your folds should look believable. Now there are other factors, of course, obviously, but we'll go through those as we move on. Right now, just keep in mind the displacement and movement of cloth as you sculpt. Oh, also you'll sometimes see the shapes of the pipe start to curve further out like this, the more convex it becomes. Just keep this in mind as we move through the folds. And one last thing before we move on, the brushes I'm using here aren't crazy. It's mainly the smooth brush, the standard brush, and a few clay brushes, or just one clay brush. You can pick your choice there. It's really nothing fancy. So yeah, that's about it. Alright, so up next we have the Diaper Fold. Yes, the aptly named Diaper Fold, like the diapers on babies or like a bridge, it spreads across, or dia means to spread across. And this fold actually only has 2 tension points or more to create multiple folds, and it creates a very distinct pattern of folds that set it apart from the rest. So for this fold to actually work, you need to have a bit of fabric between the 2 tension points. Oh, and also if the tension points are too taut, then the fold won't be too apparent. Now, assuming the points are relatively close to one another, you'll see the distinct 2 sides of the fold occur, then taper down as the fabric gets less and less. Again, remember that we only have so much fabric to work from, it's not an infinite amount. You'll also notice the pattern repeats downwards, and also the most robust shape is on the top, after which it will drop down and sag more the further down you go thanks to gravity. Another thing to note with the Diaper Fold is that it's rather symmetrical, but if you lift one tension point higher, the first fold will start from the higher side, then alternate in an asymmetrical pattern. And yes, on the sides, depending on how much fabric there is and where the tension points are, you might see some pipe folds. These folds add to the grandeur of the Diaper Fold, so do try to include them if possible and if it makes sense. Alright, so drawing the folds. When drawing the fold, I'll use the sides, one horizontal and one diagonal, as a guide, and then divide them into 4 planes, 2 for each side. I'll then make sure to sag and also make the folds less prominent the further down I go. After this, make sure to soften the folds so they don't look like metal plates. Now, if this is too technical for you, you can just draw some curved lines from the sides across and then join them with a line at the bottom to complete the diaper, and shade as necessary. If you want extra flair, you can just add the pipe folds at the ends like I'm showing over here. And that's really it. As a quick guide, remember that the Diaper Fold can occur on casual clothing all the time around the chest and back area when you reach up with both arms, or along the sides when one arm is raised. These folds aren't actually too common on purpose on modern casual clothing, but if you want to add that extra flair to a dress, headdress, scarf, etc., this fold will certainly help with that. Alright, now sculpting the diaper folds. Sculpting the Diaper Fold, as you might have guessed, as long as you know how to sculpt the pipe fold, this will be the same but with more dynamism and horizontally. In this case, step 1, I'll pay attention to the direction of the folds. With this cloth, the tension points are at the top of the scapula. I'm pretending that this is a body, by the way, and this is an arm. It's at the top of the scapula or the shoulder blades and the bottom of the pecs or the chest. After establishing this, I can start step 2, which is to connect the tension points using asymmetrical drooping pipes, like I showed in the drawing section. You can see them alternate and vary in size and thickness. After that, all I'm doing, step 3, is refining the shapes to show the dynamism of the cloth and pose, and also the body that's underneath, if I can. Now that's it really. You can get more information from studying more poses and cloth variations, as the theory will only take you so far, so do remember that. Alright, up next we have the drop fold, and yes, it sure looks a lot like the pipe fold, and I would honestly say that there are really just 4 to 5 main folds, with the other 2 or 3 being a variation or combination of the other main folds, and the drop fold is one of those folds. I like to think of the drop fold as the crazy, flamboyant, eccentric cousin of the pipe fold. Now I say this because the drop fold has a lot of the same characteristics as the pipe fold, the pipe-like shape, a singular or a set of running tension points, it's somewhat simple to draw, etc. It varies in the fact that this fold tends to radiate outwards for some variations, and it can also taper out the further down you go. When it drops from a height, the fold can vary more than your average pipe fold. And also in design, the fold can drop down to create a purposeful shape like this on a dress, for example. This is also considered a drop fold. Alright, drawing drop folds. As you might have figured out by now, if you can draw pipe folds, then you can draw drop folds. All you need is a tension point or points, and after that you can radiate the fold out from there. You can be a little bit more flamboyant with it as well, since we aren't dealing with pipe folds. And another thing you might have noticed is that a lot of people will just cast off most drop folds as pipe folds, and yeah, a lot of the time drop folds will start off as pipes, but due to the other tension points or movements, design, etc., the fold will start to vary to such an extent to not be considered a plain old pipe. thus its distinction. But again, if you confuse them, it really doesn't matter. As long as you know how to draw both of them, you'll be fine. Sculpting drop folds. Now honestly, given all the information I just gave you on sculpting the last two folds, you can probably work out the drop fold will start from a tension point, drop down or radiate, and if you want something more tailored, you can try sculpting something along these lines. Although for this I would personally just use Marvelous Designer to get the basic shape and then bring that into a sculpting program to work on. Now before you ask, but can't you just make all your clothes in Marvelous Designer so there's no need to sculpt? Well, firstly, that is exactly what I do, but also secondly, as great as automated processes are, knowing how something works and the anatomy of it, in this case the way folds work, will truly help you to understand and also change what you sculpt as opposed to blindly following what's given to you. Not many people got famous for painting by numbers, it's those that create and push what we know that stand out, so that's why you need to make the effort. Alright, so before we move on to the next fold, we do need to discuss something that's super important, and that's the eye of the fold. So what is this all-important eye of the fold? Well, it's simply the point at which a fold is folded at. And yeah, I get that's probably more confusing than clarifying, so let me explain it like this. If you take a simple pipe fold, which we explained already, which you now know is formed from simple tension points, and fold that fold, you will get an eye. Now on that second fold, a tension point is created and that is called the eye of the fold. So it's just another name for the point at which a simple fold, aka a pipe, quickly changes direction like this over here. Now that you know this, you will see it appear in folds all the time, and even though it's called the eye, I like to think of it as an ET-shaped head changing the direction of the cloth. The ET analogy, by the way, isn't just for fun. What I and others often do is exaggerate the eye to form this ET-shaped turn. It really shows off the form and lets the viewer know the cloth is fluid and full of energy. And speaking of eyes, if you like what you've seen, try and keep an eye out for my blog, website, Discord, paid tutorials, and my other videos on the channel. So yeah, the eye of the fold is something we are going to come across a ton in the remaining folds, so keep that in mind. It is very, very important, the eye of the fold. Alright, now up next we have the half-lock fold, a pretty interesting one, and as you might have guessed, the intro of the eye of the fold just before this fold wasn't a coincidence, as this fold pretty much relies on eyes to really sell the form and structure of it. As with anything fold related, they have variations and this fold is no exception. I like to categorize this fold into two types, tailored and spontaneous. As you might have figured, the tailored ones are created on purpose for the design, while spontaneous folds of course are formed from movement, tension and compression created by the person or object the cloth is draped upon. Now let's discuss the spontaneous half-lock first. This is definitely the easiest, as any cylindrical forms that fold will cause the half-lock to form. This is super easy to observe on elbows, knees, and even at the waist. All of these are cylindrical forms that can easily fold or bend, in our case, to compress the cloth to form the half-lock fold. Along with the main half-lock fold, you'll see secondary folds such as pipes, drop folds, zigzags, and spirals, etc. accompanying it. Basically, depending on the position and location and type of fabric, almost any fold can accompany the half-lock fold. A good bet would be the pipe or drop fold radiating out from the tension point opposite the half-lock fold. Now again, this all depends on other factors, so study up on other references to strengthen your knowledge. Don't just blindly draw it. Alright, and the second type of fold will be the tailored half-lock. The tailored half-lock, on the other hand, can be made to look like the spontaneous version, and another way that people purposely create a half-lock fold is to twist the cloth on itself so it really adds some dynamic movement to the drapery. Think of a diaper fold being twisted and then draped again. You're most likely going to see the spontaneous version on modern clothing, but the tailored version is still good to know about, especially when you're creating dresses or fancy clothing for women. Alright, so drawing the half-lock fold. Now given all the information above, the spontaneous half-lock fold can be drawn using the main half-lock with an emphasized eye, accompanied by some secondary radiating folds, usually pipes or drop folds. They can also be spiral folds, which are very common on arms. Now I usually draw this eye with a suggested overlap to show that it's folding, and also the radiating lines aren't haphazardly random, as they radiate out from or near the main tension point, tapering out as they go. So again, pipe folds are giving us direction and a little bit of organization with these folds, they're not random. The tailored half-lock can either look like the spontaneous version, which in the tailored version's case was done on purpose of course, or it consists of the aforementioned twisting and draping of the fabric to create a dynamic shape. Drawing the tailored version is slightly more complex, as you need to understand how twists work in drawing or sculpting. Now first, step 1, I'll get the drape points in. After that, I'll get 4 main lines in. the two sides of the outer drape points, and the diagonals that connect the drape points. Keeping the twists in mind, step 2, we will now give the illusion of one side twisting into the other. I'll do this by drawing the line toward the drape points and also making sure to erase the areas that overlap. After this, you can add any secondary folds, step 3, i.e. pipe folds, etc., to spruce up the overall image or design. Okay, sculpting half-lock folds. Here I'm just making use of the model I made in Marvelous Designer, but the theory is the same. Start low poly and work your way up using the 2D theory. In this case, the main idea is to use the primary fold at the lock and reinforce it using drop and zigzag or spiral folds. And just so you know, we will learn about these folds next, so don't worry. But for this fold, step 1, I'll establish the primary form, which is the main fold at the back of the knee in this case. I'll also be sure to add those good old eyes of the fold to this, and after that, step 2, I will add the drop folds and zigzags or spirals to further add to the believability of the fold. And hey, that's about it really. Just get the 2D theory in and make sure to actually pull the folds out in 3D so they actually look 3D, and using the knowledge of the previous folds, you'll be able to build reliable looking folds. As you can see, the pipe fold or drop fold is super important as it gives life to all of the other folds. The foundations might be boring, but they hold everything up as they should. So master the pipe fold and the drop fold and you're pretty much halfway there with the other folds. Alright, up next we have the zigzag fold, a little bit more exciting in this case. And just like some of the other folds, this fold doesn't need much explanation as the clue is in the name. Zigzag folds are best observed at the bottom of pants with extra material or when you pull your sleeves up. This type of fold is not usually tailored, but like with most things, it can be done on purpose if the designer wishes. With all that information, you can guess that this fold mostly occurs between tension points where there is an excess of material, usually on the arm or leg, forming a hard to miss zigzag pattern. The zigzags themselves have eyes which are caused from the compression of the material above and the objects or materials below. These shapes are triangular, just like all of the folds or shapes you will see throughout drapery, but unlike actual triangles, the corners are super smooth. Another funny but important thing to note is the fact that the triangle shapes look like drunk triangles barely able to stand. This is important as it will make your cloth look more believable. Making them too rigid, the triangles, or straight will make the cloth look too plastic. So again, observe this on actual materials and pictures. Alright, so drawing the zigzag folds. As with the last fold, this fold relies on cylindrical resting points and compression. So here, step 1, I will draw out a tapering cylinder as a base, and then near the bottom, step 2, we can add some varying zigzag patterns. You can either start with zigzagged lines or you can use varying triangles or diamonds to start the pattern. I prefer the triangles and diamonds as they give more of a solid start from the get-go. Now don't forget that they need to be drunk triangles or diamonds, so you can't draw them too rigid. But if you feel more comfortable, you can start off with making them rigid and then move on to making them a little bit more floppy, but that's an extra step. But again, whatever you feel is necessary for you. After that, I will try to close up the zigzags by giving them a bit of volume, step 3, by getting the outside areas drawn in. Now don't go too crazy here as they should be simple shapes, simple lines with some overlap, not a hodgepodge of zigzag lines. Finally, step 4, you can add some pipe folds above to show that the transition from a simple to complex fold. As a bonus, you can add some halftones and straps at the end to really sell the fabric's dimensions. Okay, and as for sculpting the zigzag folds, so here we need to make sure that the lines and folds actually flow into one another, just like the 2D version, but here the fold wraps all the way around the object, so keep that in mind by using construction ellipses, and I'll show how to do that with the spiral folds next, so just hang tight. But as for the zigzag folds, step 1, I'll establish the primary forms with ellipses and drunk triangles. After that, I will dig in the folds, step 2, so that we have a bit more volume and actually looks 3D. Finally, step 3, I'll add in some smaller folds to really drive in the realism, but as you can see, the first step is really where everything anchors from. Another thing to keep in mind here is that you can clearly see the forms of the calves under the fabric. Now this really sells the idea of clothing on an actual person, so be sure to look at plenty of refs to help you here. This goes for any cloth on any object or person, so please don't forget about the object underneath, as this is really important as well. It's kind of the point of clothing to show the forms underneath. Alright, up next we have the spiral fold. Now just like with the drop fold, the spiral fold is the crazy cousin of another fold, and this time it's the zigzag fold. Yep, that's right, the spiral fold is pretty much the zigzag fold, but with a twist. it has a twist. Come on, I had to. Anyway, just like with the zigzag fold, the spiral fold usually lies on a cylindrical object squished between 2 points of compression. The only difference is that there is a twist to the fabric and/or it is squished tighter together. That's pretty much it. Now, some of the shapes to look out for here wouldn't really be drunk triangles, but drunk snakes and S shapes. The triangles will still appear on the thinner material, so do keep an eye out for that. Oh, and also the thinner the material, the more sober the snake will appear. In other words, baggy clothing will have baggy, wonky looking spirals, while thinner cloth will have tauter, laser precise like folds, so look out for that as well. Another great tip would be that to draw both zigzag and spiral folds is the fact that you can use ellipses to guide the folds when you are drawing them, also sculpting them. This helps because these folds occur on cylindrical objects, so wrapping an ellipse around to guide you is a great help. You can see these drawings over here for more clarification. Another thing to note from the pictures is the fact that these spirals can't always wrap around the arm if there isn't enough material to go around. This is the case here as the shirt is pretty tight on this dude, so again, simple observation will take you a long way. Alright, so drawing the spiral folds, the fun part. In this case, step 1, you will need to decide how much twist and compression you want for the fold. Again, do keep in mind the type of material. You can't always add too much twist and compression on thinner materials like I showed before, but the more compression and twist, the more parallel the ellipses will be, and the less compression plus twist means less parallel lines like I showed before. Next, step 2, you can draw in 1 or 2 drunk snakes like I've outlined above, and some variation. Also, make sure to keep the shapes unique. This isn't just with clothing, it's with drawing in general. Don't repeat the same pattern over and over and over and over and over again. It can get very boring very quickly, so be careful, especially with clothing. Step 3, I'll add some volume to the shapes I drew out by making sure to follow the curves of the ellipses I drew out in step 1. And lastly, step 4, I'll add some drop, pipe or zigzag folds to flesh out the pants or shirt. Alright, so sculpting spirals. Now this really shouldn't come as a surprise, but sculpting these folds are pretty much in line with the zigzag folds, but here you just make use of the rules stated with the drawing. That's it really. Also, I was lazy to do another sculpt, but if you need more clarification you can see the video over here, what I'm doing. Nothing too crazy, just using more spirals, more ellipses, and just kind of varying it on what I need for the material or sculpt or situation. So it's really about looking at references, seeing what you can get out of that, and analyzing that and using that and going back and forth. It's just really one of those processes, you can't dodge that. Alright, so up next and lastly we have the inert fold. Now this time it's a fold that pretty much combines and also throws out almost everything you learned about drapery till now. The inert fold, aka the dead fold, as the name suggests, it's dead, not filled with movement, not doing much. Put it however you want, this fold relies on no specific forms or rules, but combines all the folds you've learned to create a hodgepodge of folds atop of folds. Yeah, it's a combination of compression, gravity, and the material type to create a mix of folds that run wild. Now don't panic just yet, because this fold isn't usually draped on a person or object, so it means we can minus the zigzag, spiral, diaper, and drop folds from the mix. Now remember, these folds usually need specific tension or resting points to occur, and we also know that the inert fold turns and folds and entangles quite a bit, so we can easily, well not that easily, create this fold from mainly pipes and half-locks as the base. Now yes, I know that you can clearly see some of the other folds forming, and if we need to we can add the other folds, but we should first start with something simple and then move on from that, because the inert fold can be a bit of a hassle to draw, so just keep that in mind. Start off simple and then add as you see fit. Okay, drawing the inert fold. Starting off is actually quite easy with this fold. Step 1, draw out the big shape with some or a lot of overlap. For this we'll need 2 things, sometimes 3. 1, how much the cloth will be seen on the floor, and 2, which way are we pulling the fabric towards or against. I know this seems kind of abstract, but you'll see what I mean with the pictures. The third thing you sometimes might want to know is where is the cloth coming from. In this case we just have a single cloth plopped on the floor, so there's no need for option 3. But you will use the third thing, however, if you are drawing someone with a really long dress meant to drape on the floor, for example. Alright, but here instead you can see me dragging it and moving it, so this is another way to pay attention to that. Also, what you'll notice is that I'm kind of paying attention to 3 areas here, and you'll notice the 3 areas being highlighted a little bit later, but for now, again, I'm starting off with a major area, the other major area, and yes, I'm drawing from a reference because it's a lot easier to do so, especially with a dead fold. But you can see it's making use of all of the elements that we learnt in the previous folds. That's really about it. So yeah, I'm dropping the fold as well. Okay, just to see what that happens. And yeah, it's more like 2 main areas with the third on the left. I'll highlight them at the end, you'll be able to see that. But yeah, again, as long as you know how to draw folds, the dead fold is kind of just relying on that information here. There are just some core shadows that didn't really fill in properly, but again, you can kind of see it's a cloth lying on the floor, nothing too special. And over here we can see the finished product, and of course we can see the 3 main areas. I like 3 because it's a nice uneven number, just to kind of get things asymmetry there, because the dead fold kind of relies on that. And yeah, that's about it. As you can see, as long as you can draw the other folds, the dead fold will kind of make sense as you go along, but you really need to practice it. Just kind of do what I'm doing here. Take a cloth about 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters and then just try practicing with that. Don't use simulators. I want you to actually use reality to see how it reacts in real time, okay? Because it's pretty easy. It's not like you guys can't set this up on your own. And after that, you can move on to bigger cloths if you want. But for now, just stick with something small, just so you have very few folds to draw, and then you can move on after that. But for now, start small and get that right, and then move on from there. Oh boy, that was a lot of information. I don't think that just reading one article or watching this video once will make you an expert on cloth. It won't. What you need to do for all your studies, by the way, not just cloth, is study, analyze and compare, draw, correct, and then repeat until dead. In that vein, let's go through a quick summary before I end the video. Now, first things first, remember to keep these things in mind when you are dealing with cloth. Roughly, there are 5 things to juggle. Resting areas, the areas that influence the cloth's overall shape. Tension points, the points that influence the folds and cloth direction. Gathering areas, the areas of rest, usually between tension points or on the ends of tension points. Material type, remember that thicker materials have bigger and thinner materials can have more shapes or less shapes depending on the type and fold. Gravity and movement. Lastly, this will affect the movement and rhythms of the cloth depending on the type of movement or gravity applied to the character. Okay, and lastly, just a quick rundown of the folds. Of course, we know that there are 7 main folds, and each plays off the fact that a pipe fold, along with the eyes of the fold, can evolve, twist, collapse, and crash into other forms, creating the 6 other main folds. Here are the folds again. The pipe fold, this is the simplest fold, forming from simple areas or points of tension or compression to form a pipe-like shape, drawn using simple pipes moving and flowing from one tension point to the next. Diaper fold, a fold that spreads across 2 points to form a flimsy bridge-like set of pipe folds, drawn with loose lines resembling flimsy pipes spreading between the points. Drop fold, the crazy cousin of the pipe fold, this fold can drop from multiple points to form some flimsy pipes that open up towards the end, or it can spread out from one tension point dropping down. Take your pick. Alright, and up next we get a little bit more creative. We have the half-lock fold, another fold that changes depending on the scenario. It can form from folding via a cylindrical form or being purposely draped by folding and twisting one side over the other to create a designed fold, drawn either using lines folding into one another or twisting forms. Alright, up next we have the zigzag fold. This is caused by the compression of the fabric above and sometimes beneath it. This fold will form a succession of drunk triangles that create the characteristic zigzags you will find associated with the fold's name. Spiral fold, another crazy cousin, this time of the zigzag fold. The spiral is a compressed, twisted version of the zigzag fold. We can draw it using drunk snakes instead, while making use of ellipses to guide our curves. We can also use ellipses on the zigzag folds as well, don't forget about that. The inert fold, lastly, the last fold, but also the most difficult to deal with due to its recalcitrant nature. This fold can be blocked out using basic shapes, and then using your knowledge of folds and movement, build up the fold using pipes and half-locks. And finally, you can finish it off by praying really hard to a deity of your choice. Or you can just add more folds to it like we've discussed above. And yeah, that's about it for this one. Quite a bit of information, quite a lot to go through, but watch the video a few times and make sure to use other videos, other YouTubers, to get a little bit more information to round out your knowledge. Don't just look at my stuff only. Remember that there's tons of information here and tons of things to do and create and look at and study. And yeah, that's it. Like I said, like it if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. Let me know what you guys thought in the comment section. Don't forget to check out my Discord, my website, my blog, all that stuff. See you in the next one.